Should platforms be able to decide what is and what is not okay to be spread on those platforms, or should that be up to the government?
I don't think it should be up to government. I mean, so if it's up to government, that's where you actually start getting into First Amendment concerns.
A few weeks ago, Jack and I sat down with our friend Jeff Orlowski. He's a really good friend of ours. He's also the director of The Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it, it's streaming on Netflix, and you should watch it because it's really good. Right before we had this conversation with Jeff, Pomplamoose had just released a music video called Said on Instagram and Said on. And so I felt like it made sense to sit down with Jeff and talk to him since he just made this documentary about the dangers of social media. Since we had this talk, I feel like a lot has happened in America, and social media is kind of at the front of everyone's brain, in particular how it should be regulated and how to stop misinformation from spreading. So yeah, without further ado, here is the conversation that I edited down so that you could enjoy it, and I hope that it will really encourage you to go out and talk to your friends and have real, meaningful conversations about the role of social media in our lives.
So what do you guys want to do? What are we doing here?
So basically, we watched The Social Dilemma, and I walked away from it feeling like, crap, what does this mean for us? Like, what are we supposed to do about this?
I'd love to just offer a little bit of the background that sort of formed the creation of this film. I didn't set out to make a movie that was ripping apart tech. I am optimistic about tech. I love tech, and it was always something that was really, really exciting around when tech could be, as Steve Jobs would say, a bicycle for the mind. And I think for creators, like the Adobe suite, music software, filmmaking software, those are the things that were really such powerful examples of what tech could do in a really, really great way. I think some of the challenges happened when these business models started to shift. You know, we pay for Photoshop or Illustrator. We're paying for that software to help us make things creatively. We're not paying for Facebook or for Twitter or for YouTube or for these platforms. It's $1 trillion industry around things that we don't pay for. The film itself was an exploration into my tensions that I was feeling around loving this stuff, loving Facebook, loving Twitter, friends who work there, and then hearing and learning, wait a second, there's something wrong with it. And there's something wrong with this business model. I look at the film as it's not a critique of tech as a whole. We were talking about social media and search, right? So the Facebooks, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, the attention companies, YouTube fits in there, and Google itself, the search engine and the way the algorithm operates is its own filtering bubble effect. So that's sort of just the broad scope of where I see the critique around what companies are breaking down truth in society, what companies are literally destroying our information ecosystem and the way we understand reliable information, the way the public understands the world. And that's in many ways, in my mind, like that's the biggest concern.
What was the quote in the movie? If you aren't buying the product,
if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yeah.
Right. And that, for me, that's like the easiest, simple, it's a simplification in many ways, right? But it helps guide the public on, is this being made for me or is it being made for something else? One of the reasons why I've always loved Patreon as a model, like it is allowing for the direct interaction between the creator and the customer in some ways, right? It's like, I love your work and I want you to make work. And that being a model as opposed to this subscriber advertising model, which just messes up the whole evaluation system, right?
So it's the ad-based businesses that you're specifically getting into.
Right. We can extend another lens to the news media and Fox and MSNBC, which are ad-based. But there's a difference between you're still broadcasting to like millions of people, as opposed to Facebook, Google, Twitter, where you're broadcasting to one person. When you have the advertising-based business model that's incentivizing eyeballs, paired with machine learning and paired with a customized feed, right? It's some combination of those things, because now it's like individual, one-on-one. I've got a different feed for Nataly and a different feed for Jack. And the machine learning algorithm is going to continue to evolve and shift the feeds for each and every one of you. It's creating a Truman Show for each and every one of us. We have 2.7 billion Truman Shows going on, right? Even a couple is going to see different versions of the world and of reality because of the individualized feeds happening there.
I loved that comparison in the film. And it really was like a strong, emotionally resonant moment for me where I was like, oh, wow, I am like Truman looking at my own reality that no one else sees or understands. I really felt like Truman for that.
Yeah, I've been using this analogy, this evolution analogy around Galapagos. It's as if each of us are on our own Galapagos island. The more you engage with the feed, the faster you evolve. In a like literal sense, like the ideas and the information keep evolving. Everybody on their own individual Galapagos is drifting farther and farther apart, right? And in nature, that's what creates speciation. That's where one species splits and no longer is sexually compatible. And that, if you just apply that to ideas, right? Think of that as an idea is a package of information, just like DNA, right? And so now I'm in my like Galapagos Truman Show filter bubble, scrolling indefinitely, as is you, as each of us. And now our ideas become less and less compatible.
And they're diverging.
Right? They're diverging, right? And so you look at the left and you look at the right and you think, wait a second, why, like the left and the right are going farther and farther apart from each other. And they like literally it becomes harder and harder to have any shared conversation. It doesn't matter what issue you care about. Every issue that you care about is going on this polarized, being pulled in different directions, because that is what works for the algorithms, right? The algorithms aren't optimized towards let's have a shared civil conversation. They're optimized towards, whatever the hell is going to stick on Jack's brain today and whatever the hell is going to stick on Nataly's brain today. And let's keep going down whatever works on each of us individually.
So my question for you, Jeff, is, the things that you mentioned that are great for creators that we pay for, Photoshop, GarageBand, Adobe Premiere, like the tools, cameras, the camera that we're shooting this on.
Yeah.
I put all those things in a bucket of things that creators need called creation tools. And you're right, creators absolutely need creation tools, but creators also need two other things that most people who are, in the world need. A way to reach people with those with the creations that they make using the tools. So audience, right? Or customers or impact, however you want to frame it, impact on others is like a second bucket. And that's the bucket where all the social media companies are kind of in right now. There's a third bucket, which is monetization tools. And I actually think those things are separate, right? Patreon is a different type of monetization tool than ad revenue, which is a different type of monetization tool than merchandise, which is a different type of monetization tool than licensing. But the point is, in order to be a functioning creator and to do it full time, you not only need creation tools, you need a way to reach audience, and you need a way to make money. If you don't have all three of those things, you can't really be a full-time creator. And so my question for you is, what are we to do? Pomplamoose has built our whole business online. We saw this film, and neither one of us wants to freaking participate in this ecosystem because it's revolting. And we agree, it's got so many negative side effects. And now here we are, 10 years later, we've built our entire lives and our entire businesses on this trifecta of creation tools like cameras and Adobe Premiere, audience tools like YouTube and Instagram, and then monetization tools, ad revenue and merch and Patreon and all those things. What are we to do if that middle tier is no longer, acceptable? How do we kind of get around that?
It's a great question, and it's a tough question, and that's why we called this a dilemma. I think in some ways, what you're pointing out is maybe there's a greater need for new distribution tools that are aligned around creators. Like we go to YouTube and Instagram because they become the default platforms, and they become the default platforms in large part because they designed growth hacking into the core and creation of it. We still post, like the trailer for The Social Dilemma is on YouTube. The best place to put a video, short form video for people to see is YouTube right now. I just want a better version of YouTube. I want a more ethical version of YouTube where it's not being built and designed around surveillance capitalism as its core, right? Vimeo actually is a good argument in some ways. Like Vimeo doesn't practice a lot of the same tactics and techniques.
Well, the thing with Vimeo is that the value of Vimeo to me as a creator is a video player. The value of YouTube to me has nothing to do with their technology.
It's a search engine.
It has to do with their audience.
Yeah.
That's why you put your trailer on YouTube as opposed to Vimeo. It's not because YouTube has a better video player. That's a commodity now. That video tech, has been white labeled and built into a bunch of platforms. The tech itself is throwaway. It's disposable. What makes YouTube valuable is the network. It's the people that are there. It's the foot traffic, right? So they're very different tools, I guess.
They are different tools. Part of what we're stuck on is that the entire system of the internet has been built around this free model where eyeballs and click counts and the number of views is the metric. All eyeballs are treated the same, and the quantity of eyeballs is the goal, right? That is the entire backbone of every single website on the internet that's trying to monetize anything, right? Because how much traffic can we get, therefore how much advertising can we place, therefore how much revenue we yield. I think part of the question is rethinking that goal. The way capitalism exists today and the fundamental rules and physics of the planet from an environmental perspective and from a climate change perspective just are not compatible, right? Like we're hitting planetary limits in large part because of the way capitalism is operating. And we're going through this massive shift in rethinking about like, what does regenerative capitalism look like? How do you create things that are regenerative to a society and to an ecosystem, right? So I'm curious around like, how do we rebuild these platforms in a way that are fundamentally sustainable? Artists are now being forced to and now exist within this ecosystem, right? And so artists are now trying to compete and sell and promote their works on these tools and on these systems. For feature length filmmakers, you have the Netflixes and the HBOs and the Hulus and these subscription-based models where there's an outlet for that particular type of art. Now, once again, gatekeepers, high barrier to entry, the challenges of getting your work recognized out there. But YouTube has become this catch-all for art or politics or gaming or misinformation or. There's a different rubric and standard and role that art plays in society versus politics and news. And unfortunately, they're all being lumped together on this particular platform, but they have different roles in society. And maybe there's a reflection around like they need to be looked at in different ways too. I don't know. I'm just sort of riffing and rambling right now, but there's something here.
I think so. I agree. The idea of like sectioning off parts of the web for different parts of, the human experience. And, it's always bugged me that people say information should be free and therefore content should be free. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're saying art? Like you're calling art information? Like art is different than information. And we can't
calling art content.
I know.
That is accepting that the art is the just filler for our passive scrolling experiences, and it's just like, give me some other shit to look at.
So what are your thoughts on censorship? Should platforms be able to decide what is and what is not okay to be spread on those platforms, or should that be up to the government?
I don't think it should be up to government. I mean, so if it's up to government, that's where you actually start getting into First Amendment concerns. The First Amendment is really a limitation of the government. Congress shall not infringe on speech. First Amendment things don't really apply, my understanding. I'm curious your thoughts. First Amendment rules don't apply to Facebook, Twitter, or things like that because it's not government restriction. Just to wonk out for a minute here on Section 230, I mean, Section 230, this one little section of code gives the platforms the benefits and privileges of being a publisher with none of the responsibilities of being a publisher. And this is something that I've been starting to learn a little bit more around, like, when the printing press was invented, the Bible was a really, really popular book, but then there were like anti-witch books that were like the second most popular or something along those lines. It was like bad information was now being published. And they actually had to set up laws around what are the guidelines for what can be published. And those laws and those protections have existed for quite a while. We had a fairness doctrine that existed until Reagan disbanded. But the fairness doctrine was like a publisher needs to give equal weight to both sides of an argument. And that law was apparently like never really enforced or used, but it put things in check where like, okay, we can't be too egregious, right? The Section 230, giving Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these platforms, complete hands-off responsibility. It literally says all of the protections that we had in place around putting good information out into the public are gone. We now have systems that will literally accept any and all crap. Like, give us your worst shit, your most egregious, your most outrageous. We're going to pour lighter fluid on all of it because we're here to make everything go viral. And give us everything and anything, and we'll spread it for you. And then only in like the most extreme examples where it's like, oh, this is actually really bad for, like, it's bad for PR, we're going to tamper down like the Holocaust wasn't real stuff. And so this is really like, we're putting our hands up, let the machines do it. It's not our fault because the machines are doing it. We're going to make everything go viral. And only in the worst cases will we intervene. Like, if that's the system, right? So that's the system that we're in right now. Facebook and Twitter can come in and try to regulate COVID a little bit. We can come in and regulate the election conversation a little bit. But it's literally any divisive issue will yield polarized output and misinformation. Misinformation spreads 6 times faster than the truth on Twitter. So you have the system where bad information and inaccurate information is more viral than accurate information. This is where the notion of an information ecosystem has really resonated with me, because with our past projects on climate, when you look at the planet as an ecosystem, and you start messing with the dials and you start increasing this and increasing that and decreasing that, like, it throws the whole system out of whack. We have an information ecosystem that has just ramped up really negative emotions and viral emotions and ramped up misinformation and ramped down truth. And that's what the entire global population exists in now, whether or not you're on social media. Like, that is the global conversation. And we've been in that for a decade now. So your question around like who's responsible, the platforms are the only possible player that I think could be responsible. They're the ones where all of this stuff is going through. And we need to have some sort of standards around what is good information or not. Well, go ahead.
What can we do to change the platforms? What can we as individuals do?
Honestly, tell your Congress people and your senators that we need to like end this decades of no regulation of one of the biggest industries in the world.
Okay, so
Like,
the government shouldn't regulate it.
The government needs to regulate the companies, not the content. Right? The government shouldn't be in charge of like what is being posted or not, but the government can and needs to, and they're the only institution that can put guardrails on the companies. Antitrust is a conversation that's happening now, which it's the conversation starter, and we can and should break some of the big companies up. But we need to change the business model. Like, in my mind, there are some people pushing to outlaw the business model, to outlaw the advertising surveillance-based micro-targeted business model. Like, that it is as bad for society as burning fossil fuels. Like, we need to limit burning fossil fuels. We need to limit the way this business model is affecting society. So I think politicians have the greatest power in doing that, not the content itself, but redefining and setting up rules for the companies, and that can and likely will be done in an international way. Every country is dealing with this right now. And I think there will be an international effort to do some sort of regulation here.
What are the mental health consequences?
Teen suicide and self-harm numbers are going through the roof. It's not coming from screen time. It's coming from social media at really young ages. When young humans with a prefrontal cortex that's not fully myelinated, like literally the brain is not done baking, we are learning in those ages how to relate and engage with other humans. We're learning how to be social creatures. And now we're taking an entire generation and saying, we're going to drop you into this system that is really skilled at manipulating emotions, right? Machine learning algorithms with customized feeds figure out what each and every one of us is most vulnerable to. Some of us are most vulnerable to an Instagram feed. Some of us are most vulnerable to news on Twitter. Some of us are most vulnerable to the family photos of your nieces and cousins on Facebook. For me, it was news and politics on Facebook. Like, that was a thing that I was super susceptible to. And when I saw that that's what the algorithms were regurgitating to me, and I saw that I was going into this filter bubble effect and pushing me further and further down a particular worldview, and I saw the manipulative techniques, that's when I could be like, I don't want to engage in this thing. Like, I don't want to be part of this system. I don't want to be pushed in the direction that the algorithm is going to push me.
Do you think that people should delete their social accounts?
So I haven't deleted my accounts. I've stopped using them, but I haven't deleted them. I have stopped engaging with any algorithmic feed. I don't want to take part in anything that has the opportunity to show me an ad. I don't want to take part in anything where the model of me is getting more and more refined through feeds that are learning over and over. I've installed the newsfeed eradicator, which is a plugin you can put into Twitter and Facebook. So if I went to facebook.com, there would be nothing to scroll through.
But that's you as a person. What about you as a business? What about Exposure Labs?
Right.
Should Pomplamoose stop posting on Instagram?
That's a good question, and I'm torn on that one. The social dilemma posts on Instagram, the way we look at it is that we are trying to provide educational content and resources. We're not trying to build follower count. We're not using those platforms in self-promotional ways. Our business model is through a Netflix or the distributors of feature films. I'm a huge fan of the content that you guys make. I'm using content like, as we just flagged, but like the art that Pomplamoose makes is beautiful and powerful and engaging. And I love watching it, and others want to watch it. And people love sharing it with other people and be like, hey, you have to watch this stuff.
So sorry to cut you off, but like, there's a piece of me that's like, I'm not posting misinformation. I'm not posting manipulative political content. I'm not posting stuff that divides Americans or in the world. I know, but so that piece of me is being selfish, because by posting stuff that feeds into algorithms and addiction and engagement, we're just furthering the mission of those platforms. We're one more reason for that random person to use Facebook. And like, do we want to be that reason?
But Pomplamoose could also then try to push people to other platforms. Pomplamoose via Patreon could push people to Vimeo, could push people to, here's our email newsletter, and you can watch the video embedded in the newsletter and don't engage with the algorithm. It's not going through the middleman of Facebook and Twitter, right? It's not Instagram trying to monetize and send people down a rabbit hole.
So that's actually how I use YouTube. I don't use home, which is my algorithmic feed. I use subscriptions, which is who I've chosen to form a relationship with. I suppose we could encourage our fans to use it that way too. We could say, look, subscribe, don't use your home feed.
Watch the videos that you are actually subscribed to.
It's a little funny because it feels self-serving, right? We're basically saying like, watch your subscriptions, watch Pomplamoose, don't watch your algorithmically generated stuff, which is gonna be hyper engaging and gonna draw you in and gonna take you down the rabbit hole. There's another component of it, which is like, I agree with you on the recommendations. I do. I think like the feed and the ease for misinformation to go viral, right? And these the way that these platforms are designed is a huge part of the problem. And that's a huge part of the reason that people found Pomplamoose in the first place. Without that, we would have zero fans.
That's the thing. I feel like
I
feel
with that,
so
but-
ungrateful sometimes when I think about this. I'm like, should we stop posting on YouTube? And then it's like, well, you know, we wouldn't have any fans if it weren't for YouTube. We caught that first wave back when YouTube was just a website that posted cool videos. We have also been able to, 10 years later, grow our fan base because of YouTube. And now, in the middle of this freaking pandemic, most musicians are sitting at home and they can't record in studios and they can't go on tour and they can't make money, and we're able to survive because of YouTube.
And what's so infuriating about it is like, you know, there's so many wonderful things about these platforms, and the bad things are so horribly bad. And it's strange to have both of those things happening at the same time.
Yes.
Part of the reason I want to talk to you is so that we can suggest things to our fans to help people have more healthy relationships with the apps that they're using.
Right. We should have a bunch of this on the Social Dilemma's website already. I could just rattle off a couple of things and just ways to think about it as well.
Right.
I've stopped using Google as a search engine. I'm still stuck with Google as mail and calendar, and I'm trying to figure out how to migrate off, but I don't want to participate with Google. So I don't use Google as a search. I use DuckDuckGo or I use Quant. I use Brave as a browser that's built off of Chrome, but is much more conscious of your privacy. I'm trying to eliminate the places and the ways that a company can build a model of me, right? The analogy that we use in the film, this like avatar digital model of you that's getting better and better and better as you feed it more data. I'm trying to like resist there. I go to news organizations for news and information. I try not to get any of that from any feed. I get content in from emails. Emails come in from an artist or from an organization or an NGO, and I can engage with the content there. Right. I still feel fine if somebody sends me, check out this tweet that somebody wrote about whatever, going there and reading the article. Those engagements are okay in my mind, but I end it there. I don't go into scroll world.
Do you publish on those platforms?
For the social dilemma, we do push out very, very judiciously and very limited. And once again, it's not tied to our business model, but we do publish, here are events that we're doing, here are conversations that are happening, here's how you can learn more about the social dilemma. But part of what you were just getting at there, Nataly, around like, how do you encourage your fans to have a better relationship with their technology? Part of it is like, do we need to be scrolling for hours and hours on end? Like, is that actually making your life better? One of the big things that we've been thinking through is like, how do we get people off of devices just to have real human conversation? We've been talking about like phone-free dinners. Like, even that is a radical concept for a lot of families around just like go back to having real human to human conversation, have real time with people that matter in your life, right? And that's the thing. Like, how do we move ourselves away from being content? How do we move ourselves from being passive consumers, engage with the things that are meaningful to you, pay for those things, right? Pay for the people that are providing meaningful content in your life and try to rule the rest out. These platforms have sold us on this idea that they're connecting us, but they are not connecting us. This is not connection. It's connectivity. It's the ability to like ping and like share little packets of information, but it's not human connection. These platforms aren't platforms of real human connection. Imagine something that you wanted to pay for that would give you a deeper relationship with your friends and family, that made you feel closer with the people that were important in your life. That's a totally different, like, throw everything out that we call social media now. It could be designed for us. And the biggest reflection is that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram were not designed for us.
Thank you to Jeff for taking the time to talk to us. Thanks to the entire team that made The Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it yet, again, you should watch it. It's on Netflix. I don't know what this is gonna mean for Pamplemousse. I don't know what the answer is, how to responsibly post. All I will say for now is that I am going to definitely prioritize connection over connectivity. I hope that was a helpful conversation, and I will see you later. Okay, bye.